Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Le Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. As always, we are here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer each week. Good evening, Michael.
How are you doing, Cole?
Very well, thank you all. Actually, I'm a little under the weather, but mentally I'm rebounding. I've been sleeping so much that I feel good to be awake right now.
It's good to be getting better. I kind of like being sick and having that time where you can totally indulge just staying in bed and taking care of yourself. Realize it's like all I wanted to do is be lazy, but as soon as I'm sick, I can just justify it. This TV's making me better. All these episodes of 30 Rock I'm back to back in. It's like chicken soup.
Oh, I wanted to tell you we finished watching The Keepers.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not ruin anything for people, but the conclusion-ish is, hey.
I have to say, after, I've seen a lot of these movies, Deliver Us from Evil and Spotlight and The Keepers, and you see all these things that just keep coming around and around and around, and you start to do the math on not how many thousands of people the Catholic Church has abused, but how many millions of people the Catholic Church has sexually abused. Within
the last few decades, right? And they've been around for...
It starts to paint a picture of the Catholic Church as an institution of institutionalized pedophilia.
It's like if I made...
Like a cult built on pedophilia.
If I had a restaurant and I was like a steak restaurant,
yeah,
and I really want to be known as a steak restaurant,
yeah, yeah,
but I sold a hot dog every once in a while,
mm-hmm.
You wouldn't really call me a hot dog restaurant,
right?
But let's say I sell twice as many hot dogs as I did last year, and then twice again, and then all of a sudden every freaking day you're hearing about me selling hot dogs to people. I'm selling hot dogs left and right. It's hard to even concentrate on the steak because there's just people eating hot dogs everywhere. You might consider me a hot dog restaurant at some point. And I don't sell steak anymore, And if you're going for the steak, you can't even get to the delicious heaven of steak pleasant things because you're just thinking about all the fucking hot dogs being eaten.
I think that your analogy is a little disfitting, if that's a word, but there's at least some humor in there, which there isn't in the terrible atrocities that the Catholic Church has committed against so many of its victims. And I feel so terrible for so many of those people. And when you see that it reaches all the way up to the archdiocese, if you had any inclination to being religious or believing that organized religion was a valid thing, you won't after that. How can there be a God if this is the system that it represents?
Well, The Keepers is really interesting because you come away with it with faith in people, faith in community, faith in the power of love and healing, and you understand spirituality. You could go into that and see that as an amazing display of people using spirituality to grow and to heal themselves. And you also come away seeing that organized religion, real bad news, real quickly.
Yeah.
Real quickly. Another good lesson from it is if you're ever looking to get vengeance with an organization, if you're looking for justice from them, don't take their lawyer. Don't take their lawyer.
All right, so enough about The Keepers. If you guys haven't seen it, I believe it's a 7-part. It's either 7 or 8 parts.
7. Like the Deadly Sins.
On Netflix, it's streaming, and it really is an engrossing and upsetting look at the Catholic Church in Baltimore in the 70s and the death of a very lovely woman. Catherine, what's her last name? Do you remember?
Sister Catherine. It's been a couple weeks. I forget.
Yeah, I can't remember, but
I want to say Sister Kathleen Keener, but
yeah, she sounds like somebody who really was just an incredibly kind and giving and big-hearted person who had found her calling and had her life cut short. At any rate, I do want to encourage you all to please donate some moolah to La Grande Bouffe, because if you listen to, let's say, an episode every week, and you thought that was worth $2.50, which I think it probably is, you could pitch in $10 a month to Mike and I through Patreon, and that would really help us out. You can find that link on my website, colesmithy.com, or you could just go to Patreon and type in Cole Smithy and see where that page is. And for $10 a month, I will feature a special thank you in the blog post section of colesmithy.com. Mike, is this the first Lars von Trier movie that we've done?
I think it is the first Lars.
I can't believe that it is. We were trying to do Fool for Love because Sam Shepard, the great Sam Shepard, passed away last week, sadly, of Lou Gehrig's disease. I didn't even know he had Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And so we were trying to come up with a Sam Shepard movie. Robert Altman directed Fool for Love, which of course Shepard wrote, but it was not available to be streamed anywhere.
And we're about getting these movies correctly. You know, you could buy it on Canal Street. They've got all of the Sam Shepard classics there on ripped Blu-ray, but we're like, no, we're gonna do this legitimate. Give our monies to the Amazons of the world.
Well, we could have waited. I could have put it in my Netflix queue and waited for it to come back, but I've got the Piano Teacher right now. It's been sitting on my desk for about a month that I still want to watch. Oh, I had a celebrity sighting yesterday. I meant to tell you.
Oh, yeah?
Helen Mirren.
Get the fuck out.
Helen Mirren. I'm in Starbucks yesterday at 92nd and 3rd, and she's in front of me. And I had just seen her picture on Twitter earlier that morning because she's had a feud with some actress, and they buried the hatchet.
Love it.
And so I recognized the haircut.
Was it Dame Judy or Maggie
No, I can't.
Smith?
I can't remember who the other actress was, but it was very clearly the same haircut. That's what tipped me off initially. You know, the white hair with the bob, and I know. But I was so, because I've been out of my head because I'm a little sick, so I couldn't get the name. I didn't have my cell phone with me, so I didn't have any way to look anything up. You know, because I could have backtracked it with my cell phone, but I just, hey. I don't, it's just enough for me to know that I was in the presence of Her Majesty, because I have to say, if you've ever seen The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, Helen Mirren is just incredible in that movie. She's also in Caligula. She's done just an amazing body of work. She must have 150 credits to her name.
Oh, yeah, and then
incredibly prolific
an
actress.
Insane amount of stage work.
Yeah, and she looked great. She looked really great. She was peppy and vibrant, and the barista called out her drink, and she said, "That's me." And she's, she had that little actorly thing where it was clear as a bell. You could really hear it. That's me. So yeah, I was in the presence of Helen Mirren yesterday.
She was doing some at the 92Y. Like, what's she?
Could be. Maybe she lives in the neighborhood. You never know. Never know.
Love it.
I know. Pretty cool. Anyway, we're just all over the place today, probably because I'm a little sick-minded. But I can't believe this is the first Von Trier movie. So I emailed Mike and said, is there something else that you want to do? And Mike gave me a little list of movies. I think Scanners was one of them, mm-hmm. The Apartment. Do you remember any of the other ones that you had on that list?
I had one more I can't think of, but I had this on there. And I know you were like, no contest.
Yeah. I looked at the list and I thought about each one and I said, no contest, because what I have come to realize in recent years is that I really do find Lars von Trier to be the most fascinating filmmaker alive.
Yeah, I think he's very on brand for our podcast, which we do all kinds of stuff. If we didn't have a guest, we can get a little more... let's call it like palatable, but there's something about these hard to watch, intellectually stimulating, ambiguously immoral, amoral films that are sort of our go-to and what I think we have the most interesting times talking about on here.
Well, it's interesting because there's a corollary. We might as well give it away that everybody knows we record 2 episodes at a time because that's how we roll. And so we're doing The Crossing Guard, which is Sean Penn's directorial debut, which he wrote and directed, and Antichrist. And there is a big corollary.
That's true. I had not thought about that.
Between these 2 movies, because the death of a child radicalizes someone, a family member.
Yes. It is the inciting incident in an extreme way. In this film, in The Crossing Guard, it's sort of backstory, and here it is our just post-credits incident, and the context of it and the meaning is sort of what is ultimately being arbitrated, is what we find at the end. The way in which and what allowed that child to die is sort of what's being debated a bit. And maybe I don't think we fully know that is the question. Everything is ultimately a mystery, right? Like every story is like, how will it be solved? And what isn't frustrating about someone who's a challenging filmmaker like von Trier is, I think he hides the sort of the inherent question a bit longer than people are comfortable with. So then when you are watching it and you're seeing things that are extremely graphic and hard to watch, you're not sure why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think if you're watching something like an action film or a straight up horror movie and quote unquote why you're doing it, those things are more palatable.
Well, it's one of the reasons that I think you have to see this movie twice. I saw it at the New York Film Festival. It came out in 2009, and I was telling Mike before we started recording that we did a Skype session with von Trier right after the screening, and I wish that I had asked him why he chose to start the movie with anal sex, a scene of anal sex, as the send-off, the introduction to how these characters have sex, because they have sex quite a bit during the film. And what I noticed when it was streaming on Netflix, I was mystified by the fact that they cut that scene. And I couldn't watch it on Netflix. I started watching it, and I noticed that wasn't there. And I refused to continue watching it because it made me think, well, what else have they cut out?
It's a bit of a under-discussed thing, is the Netflix editing, which you have to wonder what is their inputs for doing it. And they kind of throw everything at you on the same shelf, And I know my sister, when she was like 14, was talking about how much she enjoyed The Human Centipede on Netflix. And yeah, you can just really click there, and you kind of miss the days where there was, a higher shelf or like.
Well, they should tell you. There should be a disclaimer at the beginning that says this film has been edited. I mean, that's the least they could do.
Right, absolutely, in terms of editing it, or even
because you're not watching the director's film. At that point, you have to sign on and say, "I'm going to watch some baloney version of what this movie's supposed to be." And I have to say, that graphic scene. The movie is so gorgeous. Antichrist. I mean, I could wax poetic all day about this film. If you're going to call your movie Antichrist, for one thing, it has to really bring it. If it's a psychological thriller and it's called Antichrist, okay, it better go to there. And this movie really does. I would love to have William Friedkin on the show and have him discuss this movie.
That'd be very fascinating.
That would be amazing. So there's a lot of the opening sequence, black and white, and one thing that I want to point out is about the use of slow motion, which typically is something that I despise in directors. Anytime I see slow motion, it takes me out of the movie, and I think, oh, it's horrible. You just screwed up your whole movie, which I think Sean Penn did do with Crossing Guard.
Let's get as nitty-gritty as we can, too, about the difference between the slow motion, even technically, in this movie and that movie.
Right.
We'll save it for the other podcast, too.
Yeah. So this movie opens with this very operatic music, and the whole opening sequence. I think it lasts about 7 minutes. is all in this incredibly lush, very deep focus, black and white, and the couple are having sex. You've got Charlotte Gainsbourg and Willem Dafoe, who make a perfect on-screen couple because they each have such unique body types and faces, and they're perfectly believable as this couple. And they're really going at it, and while their young son, Nick, who's probably 4 years old, is climbing up on the windowsill, and there's snow outside, it's snowing, and the child falls from the window and dies.
Yeah, it opens with a kind of Eric Clapton's son tragedy here. And we are taken to Charlotte Gainsbourg in the hospital, just dealing with the psychological.
But there's the three little characters that are sitting.
Okay, yeah, let's slow down even more.
Yeah, what does it say on each one?
I believe they are the same three characters that are called the three beggars later.
Okay.
I think they have little names on them.
They're grief and pain.
Grief, pain, and I forget the third one. It might be like suffering.
No,
it's probably worth seeing. It's not that.
Yeah. So they're these little figurines that are on the desk that Nick.
They're little army men type things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny that they're called that.
That he knocks off, but they really set the tone because Willem Dafoe's character is a shrink. And so what ends up happening is he, because his wife is so inconsolable, he ends up trying to.
Yeah, he checks her out of the hospital.
Yeah,
she's in either a psychiatric ward. It looks like she's in just an ordinary hospital, but it's clear she's being treated. And he is talking about how her doctor is a quack in that sense, and that he knows better. Yeah,
her doctor's medicating her 6 ways from Sunday.
Right. And he takes her home and then begins a process of taking her through the stages of grief, through these...
through this therapy.
He has,
and it's very loving.
It creeped me out immediately.
But he's doing it in a way that if you appreciate. It's not.
I did not appreciate it.
Oh, good. Tell me.
I mean, as she points out, she's like, my doctor said it's inappropriate for you to treat me as a patient, as your wife.
Right.
And he writes that off. And
well, it is, and we know that it breaks a fundamental rule. You're not, as a doctor, you're never supposed to operate on yourself. You're not supposed to operate on your family if you're a surgeon, and likewise here, as a therapist, you're not supposed to.
Yeah, it strikes it as very strange, and he just kind of seems like a psychopath to me.
What's interesting?
Because his son also fell, and she's inconsolable, and he is completely all right and is trying to help her process her grief, but it almost in a way that makes it seem like he's just trying to get her over it. And he's not sleeping with her. He's following the rules of a therapist in a way that makes it seem like he's not at all feeling the death of his own son while she is.
But at the funeral, he's breaking down. It's broken into the three chapters: grief, pain, and despair. Despair is the one that we were leaving out.
And I just wanted to, kind of how I'm summing it up. I feel like that's sort of what would be the immediate superficial reaction to like what these characters are. I kind of thought it was played for being very suspicious and confused by okay, he was crying before, but now he's fine, and he is so removed, and why can't he send his wife to another therapist? He's being so controlling. Who is this? Like, this guy's a monster. Like, he's really putting her through the ringer. And while I say that that's a superficial reading, I don't know if it's not true.
There's some conflicting elements in the thing, because she also suffers from this weird agoraphobia where she can't be outside. And they go to this cabin in the middle of the woods called Eden.
This was her, I believe, like childhood, or like this belongs to her family. It seems. Like.
Yeah,
They have an
it's this
attachment to it.
little log cabin that's probably 120 years old in the middle of the woods where she has been working on her thesis, which has to do with witches and the way that women have been treated throughout history.
It was really late reveal in that. It was like deep Act 2 that it's like, okay, so we're learning she's an academic, she was into witches. Like, interestingly, and for better or worse, it comes weirdly late that we get this backstory and insight into her. But I think von Trier would probably have good reasons for why he's holding that from the audience until that point. But
So there's this weird psychological mess that his wife is in because obviously she's incredibly distraught over the death of her son, and then in order to cure her of her grief, he takes her to this cabin in the woods where she ostensibly has spent the perhaps 3 or 4 months sometime in the recent past working on her thesis.
it seemed that recent to you. For some reason, I thought it was like a decade before, but I had no idea.
It seemed like it was pretty. I'm not saying that it was 3 or 4 months previous to this,
but that she had spent some considerable time.
that she had spent that kind of chunk of time out there, which is kind of hard going because it seems like there's nothing around. I mean, and they don't make a big deal out of how much food they have or any of that stuff. So there is a suspension of disbelief that goes into it because they don't really take a lot of food with them, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you're gonna. I mean, you'd be theoretically you'd be catching your own food or picking your own food.
There's a lot of elements of almost magical realism,
Yeah.
and sort of stepping into this sort of like psychotic, like liminal spaces that occur starting pretty early on. But I think only once they have arrived at Eden in the woods. And what they reminded me of is some of the sequences from Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Like there's like these visions of the devil that Jesus has, and I felt like that was sort of a...
You know what I thought of was The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah?
It's the arrival in Oz, but it's so intimate. Say what you will about how you feel about these characters, about how he's crossing these professional boundaries by being her therapist. It's very intimate. We really have... The audience has this very intimate connection with these characters because of the way they relate.
Oh, and there's something that is extremely hard to capture and never attempted, because I think rarely you have director and actors who are this sort of sensual and interesting as a person to connect with each other and to really have an idea of what this like hyper close relationship would be. It's really scary to sort of see that connection and this strange violence between them.
Yeah, the slow motion stuff is so beautifully done, and under any other director, this is the thing. You have to know the rules before you can break the rules. And von Trier is a guy who knows the rules and can break them. And when he does use slow motion, he does it in such a significant plot-driven and narrative and emotionally driven way that you take that time for what it's intended. It gives you this opportunity to digest the story and digest what these characters are experiencing in a way it's filmically true.
We're watching it right now. It's playing, and let's call out what is interesting about this shot. One is this is an amazing photograph. He's doing slow motion at an incredibly high frame rate. This is probably 250 frames per second. He's showing very little motion. This isn't something where there's action that is overwhelming that you want to slow down to make more comprehensible. That's a lot of times how they use slow motion in like poorly done action movies. Is there's something that maybe the audience couldn't really grasp. Let's slow it down so it's even more dramatic. These are things that are like we're looking at a shot. It's Charlotte Gainsbourg walking up to a cabin, and it's incredibly slow motion.
It's so painterly, and you see the fog rising up above the tree line, and you have all this time to study the cabin and the size of the cabin. And this is during the therapy session, so this is part of the experience that she's having during the therapy session. And von Trier suffers from anxiety, and so a lot of this is drawn from his own experience with therapy, and he's also mocking the therapy. He's being a little sarcastic, and the scene that we're watching now is where Defoe is telling her to lie in the grass, and she says, "To just lie on top of it all?" And he says, "Yes, just lie on top of it and allow yourself to seep into it."
Yeah, that really stuck out to me.
That brings us to the beer.
Oh yeah, let's get to the beer.
Okay, because this is a really hard movie to find a beer for, but when Charlotte Gainsbourg blends into the green of the weeds that she is lying upon and vanishes, I thought, Long Trail's Green Blaze IPA rings a bell. Mm-hmm. So this is an IPA from Long Trail Brewing. Columbus, Equinox, Mosaic, and Chinook hops.
Okay.
Some yummy hops going on. 6.5 ABV. Pretty standard issue. And I like it. I find it to be very hoppy and tasty.
Yeah, this is a yummy one. This is something you could throw in your backpack and drink a few of an afternoon on a trip to the woods.
It's a little sweet. It's got a little sweet zip to it.
Yeah, it'd be good by a campfire.
Mm-hmm. So they show up at the cabin in the woods, and so everything has this idyllic quality to it, and you're pulling for this couple. You know, you're thinking about who's the protagonist in this story, and you're pulling for both of them.
I'm pulling for her. I'm creeped out by him. I think he seems like a sociopath kind of, because he seems so detached. He seems so like trying to fix his wife and like in a way that is rejecting her suffering. It's so controlling. It's so trying to pull back her hood and mess with the engine of her brain and like. And so there's this movie, and we haven't really gotten to the title, it's called Antichrist. My initial reaction on watching this is assuming that Willem Dafoe, who's previously played Jesus, is now playing the Antichrist.
Funny.
And that he's going to, in some sort of meta-criticism of psychoanalysis, reveal that he's just there to destroy her and doesn't want her to be healthy at all, and that he killed the kid somehow.
Well, to me, he clearly cares about her. He really tries to take care of her. He takes her backpack off. He's trying to help her. That's what I got, was that he's being very nurturing and really trying to help her. And she's a mess, and she's all over the place. And she's very sexual animal. She jumps on him a lot and starts boning him. In fact, I would say that for the most part, it seems that each of the sexual intercourses that we see, she is the instigator. Am I wrong about that?
I think that's right. Their sex at the beginning seems mutually inspired, and as we go deeper, she seems to be the one prompting it, and he rejects her at several different times. Typically, because he is kind of her therapist. It's almost like he makes a joke about like, you're not supposed to fuck your therapist,
right?
Even if he really wants it. It's a very strange role that he's playing, but as we're going further in the movie, I think you start to realize that he may be scared of his wife and is not just trying to help her for the best of her, but almost self-defense.
Well, also that there's the magical realist element that is brought into it, or the paranormal that occurs, and we're watching the scene right now with the deer. And if you didn't know it already, we watched this on Filmstruck. It's streaming on Filmstruck. All the Criterion supplements are there, and there's this really just mind-boggling scene where Willem Dafoe's character sees a deer with a stillborn baby deer coming out of its vagina, and it's just swinging around as it's birthing, and the deer is running away from Dafoe's character, and it's just so macabre.
It's horrifying.
It's really horrifying. It's really scary, and that's what sets us into chapter 2, which is pain and chaos reigns, and then we do have the talking fox who tells.
That's what the fox says. It says chaos reigns.
Fox has something to say for himself. Yeah, he says chaos reigns.
Yeah, so again, you have these, I'm not sure what to make of them, but there are these three characters who are, I don't know if personified is the right word, but they are.
Three characters?
Right. They're the three beggars. They're the three little toys.
Right.
It's the fox, the deer, and then I'm blanking on the third one. And we looked at
the three beggars. Despair.
And then I'm forgetting which animal represents that, but there's a third animal.
That's the bird, the crow.
The crow, exactly, the crow. And
yeah, that crow is the most obnoxious little fucker.
Oh yeah. So Von Trier is giving you these three characters, these three chapters,
these archetypes.
Yeah,
these of nature.
And they have something to do with like the stages of grief, which Defoe's character seems to have some sort of theory on how to unpack. And attached to his analysis of his wife, these stages he's trying to bring her through, he's got this pyramid that he's sort of he's designed. He is trying to understand
execute
her.
or is it, I mean, is that part of his program, or is that something that he's culling from her actions?
I think it's a map that he's trying to determine, going from the bottom, which is the thing that you're least afraid of, to the thing that you're most afraid of.
Uh-huh.
And he's scratching off the top. He's trying to understand his wife, and she doesn't seem to know what she's afraid of, but he is coming up with different ideas. I believe it says Satan, and then he crosses that off and puts God, and then he puts me in quotation marks, meaning his wife. And it's at that point that for the first time she comes out of nowhere and just attacks him brutally, like psychotically. Like she's really gone off the deep end.
Right, and it happens gradually. The first time I think she bites one of his nipples.
Yeah, but that stuff happens.
Yeah, and that's not. He takes it well. He's not slapping her or anything. He takes it on the chin, but then she comes up behind him and hits him in the back with a piece of wood. And I gotta say, the production design and the sound design on this movie is just phenomenal. It reminds me a lot of Melancholy, and I'd like to do Melancholy on the podcast too, because that's another one where Von Trier's use of sound is just bone rattling. He really brings out. There's a scene where she's hitting her head on the toilet, and it's painful. It hurts because that sound is so just distinctive. He really gets into your guts with this movie. It's a terrifying film.
Yeah, he seems to be very good at putting you in the moment by making these very realistic noises that are not overproduced in a film way. These aren't the canned noises. These are things that make your bones quiver because you really know that would be the sound of that. Like, let's give an example. To, like, drill through your leg and then to put, like, that heavy-weighted, like, grinding stone.
It's a grinding stone.
Through, and then, like, he knows what those noises are, and somehow I do too. I know what it would sound like for that to slide between the bones in my legs.
He is so meticulous. He has such a great team of animal trainers and production designers, and everybody really brings their A game. This is not. That's one of the things that I respect so much about Von Trier is that he's so rigorous, and we're watching the scene now where Defoe discovers for the first time that his wife had been putting on opposite shoes
On their child.
on their child.
Which he confronts her with, and we get the idea that this was a tiny bit of torture that she was doing to him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which is important because it leads to this one moment of flashback that she has where they're having sex and she sees the boy climb up on the windowsill while they're having sex.
and she doesn't do anything.
And she doesn't do anything.
So his wife is, for lack of a better word, potentially evil. She's revealed to be complicit in the death of their child.
Mm-hmm.
It's this big discovery that she's not actually this innocent. But I want to talk about her representation as being, is it the Antichrist? Is it the evil force in this? Is she mentally ill? On this rewatch, something that stuck out to me is when she comes back from the hospital, she dutifully pours out an extremely large bottle of pills.
Mm-hmm.
And
In the toilet.
Yeah, and we assumed that those pills, on my first viewing, were just antidepressants to help her deal with her grief or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
They could have been pills, the antipsychotic medication. She could be mentally ill. This could be, a third viewing of this, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I might think that this is just a story of untreated mental illness that this man thinks he can control
Mm-hmm.
because he's an amazing therapist.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact that she may be having a complete psychotic breakdown.
No, I
and
like
she's
it.
not-
I think that's very. I think that's
she's not
that's
evil
very
per
apt.
se. But
Yeah.
to talk about evil, she has this thesis, and I think that is something that von Trier is both toying with saying and not saying. And her thesis is that looking at the witch trials where women were killed in the thousands simply for being women, a conclusion that people make is that mankind is simply evil because it's capable of these things. That's sort of the positivistic, is like, wow, man is capable of so much evil because you could just kill people for no reason. But this dot gets connected by her, and her husband seems very freaked out by this, which is, well, if mankind is evil, then so are the women who are being murdered because they're also part of mankind. So they, in essence, had it coming. They deserved it. They too are evil. And this is a real turning point for him of being disgusted with his wife and scared about her,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's very interesting reaction. And like there's logic there, but it's also this hyper intellectual logic that's a bit hard to follow. But you have a sense that it's almost like it's not the thesis. It's like the antithesis at the center of this movie. And I haven't seen too many von Trier movies, but they do seem to be like, here's what this movie is not about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, you see it very strongly in Nymphomania 1 and 2, the way he really turns the story on its head. And I just can't think of any other dramatist willing to go that deep, because it takes a lot of work to flip those kinds of heavy concepts on their head like that. And von Trier does it with such delicacy. And he gives you a lot of context for it. He gives you a lot of cues, and so it's Hitchcockian in that way that he's helping you along. He's spoon feeding you. He's not giving you anything that you haven't earned. You're being brought along through the story, and everything that you're getting is a dose of narrative import that you're receiving at the right time.
It's kind of Shakespearean to me in its storytelling type thing, which is, it's not a crazy unique story. You could see a horror movie about a woman overcome with grief and her overbearing psychoanalyst husband trying to save her, so he takes her out of town, but he discovers that she's not feeling grief at all, and that in fact,
Oh my God, can you imagine the Hollywood remake of this thing?
I mean, totally, I could see it. It's half Marnie, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Marnie meets Sophie's Choice meets Rosemary's Baby or something. It's somewhere in there, and this has that at its core, and then it's twisting it in so many different ways, and then is kind of more interested in itself than in what your reaction to it is going to be. But let me say this: Filmstruck categorized this as a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
I do not. I find it to be much more of a psychological thriller, which is what I think about Rosemary's Baby too. I don't think that Rosemary's Baby is a horror film. I think it's a psychological
They don't
thriller.
hit the right beats for it. Like it's not that it's reductionist or an insult to call it that genre.
Mm-mm.
But if you're a fan of horror, you're not going to really be satisfied in the right ways. Although I do see how this is kind of what I was saying. This is a Hollywood horror film twisted in on itself, run through a very weird.
Well, that's the thing is
copy
there's
machine
nothing
sometimes.
Hollywood about this movie. This is the most anti-Hollywood, and with that title Antichrist, that's why you don't see a Hollywood remake of this movie, because Hollywood's not going to touch something called Antichrist. You, sir, have gone too far. It really is too far.
What do you think it's called Antichrist? It's actually a lot less clear than I
think here's the reason that I think it's called Antichrist is because it is the way that the story is connected to Mother Nature. It's the overarching narrative of this story, and we see it in the epilogue, is so connected to Mother Nature and the cruelty of nature. And he's reminding us at various times. We just saw a scene where there was a baby bird being eaten by ants, and then the other bird goes and eats the baby bird, tears it apart. Mother Nature is cruel and constant.
Yeah, that's a duality that is discussed. She says her biggest fear is nature. No, that's not exactly what happens. They're doing this very scary role play, and he says that he is nature and that he is there to kill her.
Yeah,
it's not just Mother Nature, but the deeper nature
of humanity.
Right, and so then the big twist is that she has culpability in the death of their child. But then I think again it flips back to Willem Dafoe's character becomes quite villainous at the end, though. Maybe I don't know if I'd call it self-defense, but he goes into a cave. He's buried alive. A rock falls. He is, in essence, reborn like Jesus. And he comes out of it and winds up killing his wife.
I mean, she's hallucinating. She sees their son when she walks into the cabin playing with a log.
Right, which makes me think that she's a woman who's ill and not actually evil. I think.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I mean, you're talking about the evil that we see. I mean, her actions when she attacks him with the
We've been beating around
log.
the bush. Let's break down
all the stuff that she does to him.
I feel like we've talked everything about this movie that people don't talk about, and there's like there's a few of insane violence that we've got to talk about.
Okay, so let's get to a few of them. I just want to point out that there's a rule in screenwriting that if a character is maimed, like permanently maimed in some way, like Luke Skywalker when he gets his hand chopped off. Mm-hmm. That character has to die because the audience they disconnect from that character and they can't associate with that character anymore.
Luke Skywalker didn't die.
I know, and that was the one time. Like there's an exception to every rule, but I'm just saying generally there is that rule, and so there is an act of self-maiming that we'll get to in a moment.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay.
But before that happens,
there's some non-self-maiming.
There's some non-self-maiming, and I think that what we're getting at is the blood ejaculation.
Yeah, she bashes her husband, Willem Dafoe,
in the guts.
First, she comes and she
hits him in the back with a big log, hard, really hard.
Then she bashes him in the crotch with
the log.
Then and
he's passed out by that point because that's what happens.
Then she stimulates him.
Well, he was already stimulated. Were there?
No.
Yeah. Then she stimulates him. That's right. Then they start having sex.
She has sex with him briefly.
Does he pass out or does she knock him again?
He's passed out, and then she ejaculates him, and he comes blood onto her.
All over her blouse, and
then she goes.
it's disgusting.
And
It is one of the. You know where that scene also happens is at the beginning of Necromantique 2, where the character is masturbating and ejaculates blood.
Why does that character do that?
He's committing suicide at the time.
That's tight.
Yeah.
What is that movie? I've never heard
Necromantique 2. There's
Yeah.
Necromantique, and there's by Jörg Buttgereit. Jörg Buttgereit. We'll do. Yeah, we should get to Necromantique 2.
Maybe Shocktober will.
But yeah, this is the only movie where I've seen anyone
Yeah.
ejaculate blood. The second one. Yeah.
And then she goes and does like something that I find so much more horrifying than anything I've seen in a saw
It's
film.
so horrifying.
She drills a hole through
With a
his
handsaw.
leg with a handsaw.
A hand drill.
Very clearly going between the two, your tibia and your fibula. Did I get that right? I don't know. The two bones in your legs.
Yeah.
She drills a hole through it, and then takes a giant grinding stone and puts it through it. Ties the
The lug back on.
puts the lug back on real tight, and then goes and hides the
wrench. Tosses it under the cabin.
Ugh, God. And then he spends the next 20 minutes of the movie dragging this like 50-pound
10 kilo.
10
It weighs 10 kilos.
Is that established?
Yeah. Well, I did some research.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Well, I don't really know what a kilo is. What's a kilo to a pound?
I don't know. Let me
It's
check.
Like, it's like 3 pounds or something like that.
I'll find that out.
God.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. And then he's dragging it around, and it's just, I was really surprised at some point he didn't his like the bones in his legs weren't snapped. Like, I mean, I'm sure they were, but it's like that wasn't a bit of it. That's the thing that I imagine a lot of people walked out at that point.
So, a kilo is essentially half a pound.
Oh, is it
So-
just half a pound?
Yeah.
It's not that heavy. No, it's a horrifying thing.
It's
to see
horrifying.
this
It is
thing
very horrifying.
attached through his leg like that.
Yeah.
So she's kind of going out there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, he does the right thing. He hides. He runs and hides.
He hides in this cave, this foxhole, and it's very Christ-like in Christ's tomb that he was buried in and was there for 3 days, and rose on the third. I think there's some very easy imagery to pick up there, but what's in there is a supernatural element, which is really making you question, like, what is the reality of this?
Yeah.
Previously, they've both seen strange things, but they were both in these moments of like rapture or of like seeing illusions, maybe.
Mhm.
Now there seems to be a fucking loud ass crow that won't shut the fuck up.
No, not only won't shut the fuck up,
It won't die.
it won't die.
He's trying, like, it's crowing, and she's kind of like triangulating his location.
And he picks the thing up and he's smashing it against the inside of the cave, and it tamps it down for a few seconds, and then the thing is back crowing as obnoxiously as ever. It's terrifying. It's really terrifying, and it makes the movie. You know, that's when the movie goes out on the paranormal, freaky ledge that he brings, that Von Trier takes us to. And it takes a certain mind to come up with these kinds of details and put them together. And that's what makes Von Trier so great, is he works so meticulously with details. And that's what makes the stuff resonate so much with the viewer, because it's really targeted. You know, there's no mistaking what exactly is occurring, how it's occurring, when it's occurring, why it's occurring, all that stuff. It's very specific.
It's a very small story.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's 4 actors in it. There's the couple,
Yep.
their son,
Yep.
who dies within 4 minutes,
Yeah.
and a doctor who's there for about 30 seconds, if not less.
Yeah, you can't even really count the doctor. I would say that there's the animals. I would say the animals are our characters.
But 0 extras.
And hats off to the animal trainers, because
They're great.
yeah, animals are super cool. The fox, when he's wounded and he's eating his own guts out of his belly.
Oh my god.
It's so disturbing. Just the sight of it. It's the kind of stuff that if anyone who's ever spent any time in nature, you're hiking around and you discover some gnarly little dead or dying thing. It's disturbing, and that's how nature is.
It understands something about nature, which is true to my experience, is that nature is not always just a beautiful, idyllic, Thoreauian walk through the woods. There are horrifying things
All the time.
happening in nature.
All the time.
The thing about the deer that has that stillborn baby coming out of it is watching it. You're not fully thinking that this is a moment of supernatural vision.
Right.
Maybe if you're unfamiliar with wildlife and its gruesomeness, you might think that wouldn't happen. But I'm sure someone on that film set had seen that. You get enough people who've been in the woods, like you see kind of those horrifying things.
And certainly farmers who raise animals and stuff, you see that kind of stuff.
And this movie deals with the unsettlingness of nature and is putting it in the seemingly idyllic place of Eden, the birthplace of humans in mythology, and is finding in that sacred safe space the dark evil that's inside of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure what it all adds up to. At the end, it's an extremely ambiguous. I am very interested in someone having a very coherent intellectual
dissertation about all the many layered meanings of this movie, and I think that
specifically the last scene, the last shots are
the coda is especially
a bit unfathomable.
It's very disorienting, but it's that grace note that it's the kind of grace note that von Trier is known for with something like Breaking the Waves, where the bells ring. And the thing to realize about von Trier is that he's never above poking fun at himself. So, and he's not all that serious either.
Right.
So there's a lot of humor in the stuff, but you just have to know how to take it. So if you're I would caution anyone who watches this movie about trying to get too heady about it. You've got these two hyper intellectual characters who should, by all reason, be able to work their shit out. They should be able to get on, fix their lives, be responsible, loving adults, and carry on about their business. And you can look at this, you can look at their relationship, and you can say, they're loving individuals, and they certainly have an active sex life. What's the big deal? What's the problem?
I mean, I look at this movie and I want to say, like, which character has a trait which gives them an original sin, and the easiest one for me to identify is the hubris of William Dafoe's character, believing he can fix his wife with his own comprehension of the human psyche in the process of suffering. Yeah,
no question. But he finally does, I think, realize that he's in over his head when he understands, it has that shining element to it. When he realizes that her thesis isn't based on what she said it was, but it's the exact obvious. It's that moment of recognition when Shelley Duvall finds Jack Nicholson's
his manuscript, quote unquote. Yeah.
What is it? Jack is
all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
There you go. It's that moment.
Right.
And so this movie has that too. So it does have it has all of those messages, all those layers of textual horrific meaning.
There's something trolling about von Trier that I think people on a minor way who become critics of him pick up on, which is you want to pin him down and be like, are you saying that women are evil?
Uh-huh.
Like, is this a misogynist statement?
Uh-huh.
And he's like, he's not saying it,
No.
but like, I mean, you kind of like maybe a little bit, but no, absolutely not. But what about the people that do say that? And I think that that's a thing that could be said. All of these meta arguments, they're built into it. The critique is built into the presentation, and the analysis is already diffused. And it's a big joke, but I'm actually very serious about this.
Yeah. Well, he's not going to hide. He's not going to hide from any of that stuff. He's going to embrace and address everything. He's really going to go there, and that's why I was saying, as a dramatist, I can't think of too many other people who are willing to just to look all this stuff in the eye and look at it from different angles for the sake of seeing it from different angles. That's the value of the story.
And
you can watch this movie 6 times over a period of months and come away with different ideas about who these characters are, what their motivations were, and how their interaction with society created those things.
I don't want to overhype him, but I think he's looking for a like post-rational experience with his films. I think he'd be super psyched if you wrote a dissertation on his stuff, but would also laugh at you a bit and be like, it is not about having a comprehension of it, but also it's not so ambiguous and not saying anything that you can't come to some sort of rational intellectual conception of it, but then he'll undercut it in a way that pushes you to another level of understanding. And I think if he wants anything, my guess is it's for you to transcend that idea that you can comprehend and analyze and dissect everything into its constituent parts. And he wants you to have an experience. So let's talk real quick about the feature that you had me watch, because there's a really interesting moment in that.
Oh yeah. I just wanted to mention that the personal aspect is big. The personal aspect of anxiety is personal anxiety is a big part of all of his films, and this one's no different. And so as somebody who, I suffer from claustrophobia. I hate elevators. I'll ride them, but I loathe elevators. Like if I sit around and think about elevators too much, it'll drive me nuts. I just hate them. Yeah. So we all have things that hot button things that make us anxious. So yeah, there's this hilarious bit that if you're watching it on Filmstruck and you look at the supplements from the Cannes Film Festival press conference of 2009, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy about that press conference, is because you get these, quote, film journalists who should know better, but don't. And the first one who opens his mouth when Von Trier walks in, and Von Trier, he doesn't fly. He's terrified of flight.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah. So they show him coming down and arriving in his van, la la la. He gets into the press conference, and this British journalist just tears into him.
Well, he starts very, seeming like he's going to, just suck his dick. He seems like, it's like, I had a pleasure of seeing you interviewed before, and you were discussing the film, and I just had to ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
And he goes he's like, why did you make this film?
Yeah, why did you make this film? You must explain yourself. This is the Cannes Film Festival, and for my benefit, you must explain the meaning of this film. And Von Trier...
First of all, it's like, yell at the Cannes people. They didn't have to accept his film. He made a fucking movie, and they accepted
Well,
it.
as you said, there's a right and a wrong way to ask that question. Right. And so he's obviously being very confrontational, and Von Trier is shaken. You can see, initially Von Trier, he's back on his heels a little bit, and then he smells his balls, as they say, and he fights back. And he says, you are my guest here. It's not the other way around, and it's the hand of God. And while I might not be God, I am the best film director in the world. And somebody had to say it, and it may as well be Von Trier. And in that moment, and every moment since when I watched that clip, I have to say, I second you, sir. I commend you for having the guts to say what you said, and I agree with you.
I don't know if he's the greatest filmmaker working, but I will say, and I mean this in a kind of a condescending way, but also maybe not, which I think is a very Von Trierian way to make a statement. I think he thinks he's the hand of God.
Well, you have to. That's your job as a director. If you're going to write and direct your own stuff, which Von Trier does, there's no getting around the fact that he is an auteur from start to finish. He's never made a film that somebody else wrote. He is his own man. And there's very few people like that out there. Tarantino, there's a few of them, but they're not many. And so, do I agree with him? Yeah, I do. I think, I would rather go see a Lars von Trier picture than just about anyone else.
I really appreciate that he writes all his own stuff, but wouldn't you like to see him take on the Batman franchise and just have
I wouldn't.
have Final Cut on it?
I wouldn't.
Fucking
I would
rip it to weird pieces.
if he wrote it.
That's what I mean.
Oh, if he wrote it, sure.
Yeah, sure, yeah, he writes
if he
it,
wrote
yeah.
if he wrote a Batman story, I would be amazed to see it.
It would be so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in Terry Gilliam too. I would love to see Terry Gilliam, but it's such a bankrupt genre that I actually really don't. I wouldn't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I'm so fed up with superhero nonsense.
Batman, Superman. Give me a, I believe, unnamed Willem Dafoe character who gets a 10-kilo weight through his leg bones any day over another Bruce Wayne, please.
And on that fine note, we want to thank you all very much for listening to the Grande Bouffe, the Big Feast, and please encourage you to go to Patreon and give us a few dollars every month. Pledge perhaps $5 or even $10 a month.
It just covers the beer, you guys.
Really help us out. And please remember to turn your cell phones off when you're walking, driving, riding a bicycle, or watching a movie.